the bees are bringing in. Here we are in our winter time. We're in a subtropical region and we've got beautiful honey still coming in. So we're lucky to be in a region like this. Not everybody has wintertime honey, but everywhere does have a honey season that comes and goes with different colours that come in and different flavours to match. Today we're going to be answering questions. It's this time of week where we are here to answer your questions live, and while we're doing it we will also harvest a little bit of honey into these little jars down here. So while you're thinking of your questions, put those in the comments below. We'll get to harvesting some honey. Now what I'm going to do is just assess the hive a little bit and just see what's going on in the side windows, in the rear window, and make a decision on which frame to harvest, how much honey to harvest, and so on. So I'm looking in the side window, I'm seeing lots of bees, which is a good sign. This hive's happy and healthy. Between the bees you can see the honey is mostly capped. There's a little section up this end where you can see it's uncapped, and you can see the nectar still glistening down inside the cells. They're still going through their process there of dewatering that honey. So I won't be harvesting that edge frame just yet, although it is mostly capped, so you could if you wanted to. The idea is you get the moisture content down nice and low so the honey will keep in the jar on the shelf. So choosing a frame, I'm just having a look here, and I think this one is the one to do. You can see that the honey's right out to the edges. If you get down the sides you can even see the capping. If you have a really close look you can see the capping the bees are putting on the outside of the frame. So when they've capped it all the way to the edge, it's generally a good sign that it's capped all the way through. So what I'm going to do is just take out the lower cap. For those that are just tuning in, it's live Q&A. We'll fill up some of our honey jars at the same time. If you've got answers to other people's questions, please chime in. It's a great thing to be able to share knowledge and pass on our beekeeping knowledge as we learn, and that way we can help each other in this wonderful thing we call beekeeping. Alright, I'm going to turn this handle now. Now to make it a bit easier, you can just insert it a little way and give that a turn like that. And what we're going to do is just take it to a 90. There we go. And not a bad idea, wait for a second in that position. You can already see some honey dribbling down inside the honey tube, but it's going to take a sec to come out. Look at that. Beautiful honey. Doesn't need any further processing, just flows straight out of the hive and into your jar. And I'll go ahead and open up the rest of that frame as well. So I'm turning that key to a 90 now, and there we go. We should be filling up those jars in no time. Any questions coming in?
Oh look, our little beekeepers I think are slowly tuning in for your seeds. But one of the questions is, it is winter time here, but you guys can obviously still get honey. Is that just because of where you are, or how come you can get honey all year round?
So it's simply the location. Here we are in a subtropical region. This is our winter. You could be in a t-shirt if you wanted to. It's a bit of a cooler, rainy day today, but we don't get those freezing cold temperatures and snow and so on. So the trees act accordingly, and they will flower during the winter time here, especially if we get some rain, which we have been. You get some really here, particularly on the paperbark, which is down on the swamplands below. So it just simply is our region. If you're in a tropical region, same thing, nice honey flows during the winter time. If you're down in the southern colder areas of Australia, you will get some long cold winters. There might be 4 or 5 months without any flowers at all. If you're in the northern parts of North America and in Europe and so on, then you will find there will be long cold winters, even 6 months or more, without an abundance of flowers. We better just swap that jar over. Look at that, the honey is absolutely pouring out. It is a beautiful thing. Yum, it's warm coming out of the hive. We've harvested a frame from the centre, right above the brood nest. The bees disconnect their wing muscles, they vibrate, they create warmth to keep their brood nest warm, and it also travels up and keeps the honey warm in the centre here. If we harvested an outer frame, it'd be going much slower than this. But this is a nice warm honey this morning.
Great, Cedar. Question coming in from someone in Los Hot, gets up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Just wondering, is it okay to start beekeeping in temperatures like that?
120 degrees Fahrenheit. Can someone convert
know,
that
exactly.
for me in the
I thought
comments
you might know that.
to Celsius? But yeah, bees are very resilient. They can handle extremely hot temperatures and extremely cold temperatures. What they do when it's hot is they will collect water. That's one of the last jobs a bee gets in its life. And they'll use evaporative cooling techniques with fanning that water to cool the hive to an appropriate temperature. They're after roughly our body temperature in the brood nest, and that will be the right temperature then to raise their young in the wooden wax frames down here below.
Fantastic. I've got a question coming in from Canada. Just wondering, is it all right? It's pretty warm. Is it normal for the bees to bed outside their flow hive? Well, they're in Niagara Falls.
Nice location. Yes, it is. It is normal. If you've got hot nights, the bees will be vacating. If you have a look in the side window here, just after we change this next jar, you'll find that the bees are quite hard packed in the window. There's a lot of bees there. And if you think about the bees getting airflow in order to cool their hive, when there's so many bees in the way, they can't actually get enough airflow to maintain the right temperature. So you'll find a whole lot of bees will get out of the way and they'll just hang around on the veranda at the front enjoying the evening air. And in extreme cases, you'll get bees all over the whole front of the hive and bedding down as well on those really hot, balmy nights. Now, it is a sign that you've got a lot of bees, and it might be a good idea to take a split if it's the right time of year for that, or add another super or another brood box.
Fantastic. See, the question coming in, what happens to the capped cells after emptying the frames?
So what happens is the bees recycle the wax. I guess it's like walking on a kind of a drum skin that's empty of honey underneath, and they tell pretty quickly. But it was a bit of a wild card when we were inventing, and we had all sorts of techniques to actually remove the capping inside the hive, which was incredibly complicated. But lucky for us, we had a win, and the bees will remove it themselves. And they do that just by chewing away the capping, and they'll start immediately after the honey's been harvested, and they'll start chewing away and doing their work, taking that capping off, using that wax to reform the cell, and the whole process starts again. So they recycle it on the spot. Some beekeepers say no, they don't recycle wax, but that's not true. If you purposefully put some wax on the surface of your flow frames, you can even watch them recycling that to the local area through the side window.
Fantastic. We've got a question from Tizza, who tunes in every day from every time we do Facebook Live from New South Wales. Just wondering, lives near a farm, near a canola farm, and it's been flowering, and she's really worried because it candies the honey really quickly. Just wondering if it will affect her flow frames or their flow frames.
So canola or rapeseed, as you say, does candy quite quickly. From what I understand about it, but tune in if you've got more information on this, it generally candies when beekeepers take the frames off the hive, they cool down overnight, and then they go to extract them, and the candy's getting quite set in the frames. Now, if that's the case, then what you should be doing is harvesting your honey. I guess don't leave it in the hive for too long. The edge frames might go candied, so as soon as it's getting looking capped, just harvest that canola, and you'll probably find you can pull it into your jars without actually having the candy issue. If you find it has gone candied, or perhaps the edge frames have gone candied, you can just leave those for the bees to consume during the colder times, and hopefully next time you get some nice liquid honey in the frames again.
Great, Cedar, we've got a reply that the question that came in about Las Vegas being really hot, 120 Fahrenheit, is 48 degrees Celsius.
48, now that is hot. We get
Yeah.
some maybe 42 degrees Celsius here, and that's definitely a hot day. So what bees will do in extreme temperatures like that is sometimes they'll almost completely vacate the hive. You hear these stories of a carpet of bees, like the bees have come out of their hive and just lying on the ground trying to keep cool in front of the hive. And this particular beekeeper was saying, I thought it was a meltdown. I thought they were all going to be dead. In the evening, they just went back in. So bees are incredibly resourceful. They know what they're doing. In temperatures like that, if you can give them some shade, then that would be much better, particularly during the hot parts of the day in the afternoon. So if you can position your hives perhaps under some trees where they get some shade, or even under a roof or structure, then that would definitely help that issue of meltdown. The risk is the temperature inside the hive gets hotter than wax melt temperature of about 63 degrees Celsius, and it all turns into a puddle of wax and honey, and that's the end of that colony. So ask your local beekeepers as well, but certainly you'll probably find there's lots of people keeping bees in your area.
Yeah, there's obviously a few people, it must be a bit of a heat wave going on. I think a few people are chiming in on that one.
Yep.
Cedar, Kevin's asking, he's in Tennessee, the USA, added the super a couple of days ago and just did a little brood inspection. There were just a few hive beetles, but now spotted a few in the super looking through the windows. Is it something that he should be concerned about?
So lots of areas in the world have the small hive beetle, a little black beetle that gets around the hive. Now, if your colony's strong, they'll keep them in check. They won't let them lay all over the place. If your colony's weak and the numbers of bees are low, you look in the side window, you can't see many bees, but you're seeing a few beetles, then that's when you need to be concerned, because those bees could take advantage of that time where, those beetles could take advantage of the time where there's no bees to keep them in check and start laying eggs. And they can lay thousands of eggs, and they can turn it into a beetle hive instead of a beehive, which isn't very pretty. The larvae worms their way through the brood combs and everything, and it gets called a slime out. Not much fun. So the thing to do is, if your bee numbers are low, then make sure you're trapping some of those hive beetles, and that would be using this tray down below here, which you can use to trap those beetles. So in here you can add a bit of detergent and water and trap beetles in your tray below if you have the Flow Hive 2 that has the pest management tray.
Fantastic. We've got a new Nikki from Wollongong's just ordered their Flow Hive. I'm very excited. And just wondering, they've got some solar lights near the back door. Should they remove these? They don't want to attract the bees to the back door at night.
Only if it's a problem. So you'll find if the bees can see a light that's on the edge of your house at night time from their entrance, you might get a few bees buzzing around at night time, which if it's right where your entry is, or if you've got an open window there and so on, then it could become an issue. And in that case, yes, as you say, you could switch those lights off, or position your hive so it can't see those lights at night time.
Adam's just after a few tips in Ohio, just having a few issues trying to get his bees to take to the Flow Hive supers. They've tried waxing them. Just wondering any other tips that you think would be helpful for him.
Okay, so if it's going a bit slow, the thing to do is compress your hive a bit. So take off any other boxes, just reduce it to this configuration. Make sure that when you open the window you've got lots of bees, and when you've got lots of bees and that coincides with the honey flow, the process will be quite quick from there. You can go back and add other boxes on after that, but what you really want to do is make sure that for that first time that the bees are really, there's enough population and they really want to store honey in this box, and that way they get to work covering it all in wax, joining the parts together and starting the process of storage. As you said, you can add wax. I rarely ever do that, only for a demonstration purpose. But if you're getting impatient, sometimes just scraping some burr comb off the top of your brood frames, and with your hive tool you can push it into the flow frame surface. You won't damage the flow frame, and you can watch through the side window the process of them recycling that wax and actually starting to join the cells together. Now if you've got wax and you've got a population, they're probably joining the cells together and they're waiting for a honey flow. But if you do all those things, then all you can do is wait for the nectar to come in.
Fantastic. I've got a question here. This one's kind of interesting. Just wondering if the flow hive honey is more flavoursome and tasteful because there's less oxygen in it than a regular hive that's being spun.
Well, the answer is yes, according to a Queensland University study of the flow hive honey compared to extracting in a conventional manner. Now, I've got a few theories why that is, and one, as you say, is the oxygen that the honey is exposed to. We do know that oxygen can have a degrading effect on flavour of your honey, especially the more aromatic ones. So if you are going through that process of centrifuging your honey, then all your honey is being spun in fine strands through the air. Next, what's happening is it's coming into contact with typically a stainless steel extractor. And we also know that when honey, being a bit acidic, comes into contact with things like metals, it will actually react, and there's a flavour change there as well. Next is when you mix a whole lot of honeys together, you're also changing the flavour makeup, and you're losing the ability to taste the beautiful aromatic flavours of one frame over the next. It's like mixing all your ingredients in the kitchen together, and it can still taste good, but it might not be as nice as being able to taste the amazing flavours of one thing over another. So you get that feedback as well, where people are saying, wow, it's just so aromatic and so different. I better just get another jar to fill up here.
Ooh.
And I would really recommend harvesting into single jars because of the way you get to isolate those individual flavours, which is such a joy to be able to taste and such a joy to be able to share. You get really dark honeys, really light honeys, really malty honeys, caramel, fragrant, sort of very lolly shop kind of flavours, as well as your eucalypt honeys here have that distinct Australian eucalypt flavour. So there's as many different flavours as there are flowers that produce nectar in the world, and what you'll find in your location, you'll get these unique flavours that the bees are bringing in. So I think it's a wonderful thing. It was unexpected inventing the flow hive to have that isolation of all the different flavours. So yes, you're right, there is both the study and also a lot of feedback of people saying the flow hive honey tastes better than conventional extraction methods.
Great. Amanda's got a few questions here. She's living in South Carolina and she had 3 hives and they swarmed, and she's since had put new queens in them. There's lots of brood. But she's just wondering, they're a bit behind on production, and should she supplement them with sugar water or let them just continue to forage? She's saying the nectar flows good where they are.
If the nectar flows pretty good, then I wouldn't be supplementing them with sugar, because what happens is then you will get sugar syrup stored in your honey frames, which is not what you want. You want to be eating honey, not honey that's adulterated with cane sugar. You'll find that beekeepers generally will stop feeding bees when the flow comes on for that exact reason. They want any sugar syrup just to be used for the bees to stay alive and perhaps build their population, and then when the flow comes on, you want them to be storing honey in the flow frames. So fingers crossed you get a great season to come.
Exactly, and another question that Amanda had was also wondering, have you ever had the hive wax sort of over the queen excluder so that the bees can't get into the super?
I haven't. Now, if the bees will chew away wax if they need more room. Now, they will put a lot of wax on there, typically joining the flow frames down to the excluder, joining the frames below up to the excluder. But they should always leave pathways for them so they can get through and traverse into the next box. But I guess if it's really looking like there's hardly any room for them to get through and you happen to have the hive apart, then you can get in there with your hive tool and knock some of the wax out. A little bit tedious, but it might save the bees a bit of work there.
Right, Rob's in Orange here in Australia, just wondering, has taken the queen excluder off for winter and kept the super on as it's got lots of good stores of honey. Just wondering, when spring comes, do they need to clean or prepare the super, and if so, what do they do with the brood remnants or cells that is laid in the super?
Okay, hopefully you don't have any brood laid in the super, but what you should have is frames that you've extracted like this, and they're dry with no honey left in them, or you might have taken them off and they've got a little bit of honey left in the actual flow frames. So if you then what you're trying to do is store that honey for the next season, so you can go back on and your hive can use it again. If you've got a deep freeze, that's a wonderful way to do it. Just put those frames into deep freeze and you can put them back onto the hive in the springtime. If it happens to be cold enough, perhaps you don't need the deep freezer, and simply put them in some tubs to keep them away from vermin and so on, and keep them cold. What you don't want is a humid, warm environment on your flow frames, the hive, for several months. What you find then, if there's honey in there, you may get fermentation issues, and then you'll have to, if that happens, it's not the end of the world, you'll just need to wash that out and dry it before putting it back on the hive for the bees to fix up. So you can use a hot hose from your laundry. You would set the frames to open position and just wash it all through, and then put those frames somewhere to dry for a while before putting them back on the hive again.
Great. Jen unfortunately has had a bit of a beetle attack on their hive and lost their bees. Just looking, what's the best way to totally clean the frames and box from wax and beetle mess?
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's not fun. Sorry to hear that. Does happen. The idea is you get through it and get the colony back in there and get it going again. If you've had that issue, then you will need to just check that usually a beetle attack is a secondary issue. Most likely what's happened is the queen has stopped laying and the population has reduced, or that perhaps the queen's died altogether and the population's reduced and the beetles have seized that opportunity to take over. Now, you should check for any signs in the brood frames of things like FB. Look down the cells in some bright light and look for what looks like a bit of a snail trail on the inside of the cell wall. Just check for that, and also check the smell of those frames. You don't want to get into a situation where you're rebuilding a hive on frames that have a disease issue. But if it's simply from the loss of a queen, or perhaps a bit of a downsizing in numbers for whatever reason, perhaps they swarmed, and the beetles took over, and you can go ahead and rebuild that colony. To do that, then if you're using naturally drawn frames, you'd cut out all of the wax in the bottom box here. Just simply using a knife, you can cut out that wax and put the frames, give them a little clean up and put the frames back in again. Well, prepare the frames for when you... So that's the bottom box, just removing and scraping all the wax away on the wooden frames. And you might pay to give them a little wash as well to get any sticky, fermented, slimy beetle mess honey off those frames. And then you can put them to dry. And the flow frames, just like we were talking about earlier, what you'll probably need to do, sometimes there's salvageable honey in them and you can harvest them on your bench. Using 2 keys is best for that. 2 keys go in and turn them bit by bit, open up the flow frames, let the honey flow out, and just make sure it doesn't taste fermented. If it's tasting fermented, then it's too far gone and you might want to discard that. Then you can keep those frames in the open position, use a hot water hose from your laundry just to give them a good rinse out, and then let them dry and put them aside for the next time you have your colony ready for the flow frames to go back on. Make sure you remember to put the frames into cell-formed position by putting the key in the top slot and turning it. That way the bees will be able to recycle any wax that's still on them and go through that process of creating the cells ready to store nectar again. Fingers crossed, get some better luck next time.
Exactly.
And make sure you activate your pest management tray and catch those nasty beetles.
Steve's asking, is it correct it takes 18 months before you first get honey?
It really depends. You hear stories, and staying behind the camera, he was getting honey something like in the first month of putting his hives together. He put his hive together, and a month later it just happened to be a really strong spring. The colony was strong. They filled them up straight away. He harvested. A week later they were full again. He harvested. A week later they were full again. So you get extreme stories like that. But having said that, you also get the opposite, where you won't get any honey in a whole season. Perhaps there's issues like there was a drought and there's a bit of a hangover from the drought and the trees aren't flowering. You don't really get honey stored unless you've got a strong colony coinciding with a good nectar flow. Then it gets then it can happen really quickly. So the answer is it depends, and it's always good to have a few hives because you can get a weak colony next to a strong one. You're getting a lot of honey like this, but the hive next to it getting none at all. So I'd always recommend having more hives than one if you really want to make sure you're getting honey in a season. And be patient. Like any form of agricultural farming, you can have good seasons and bad seasons, and it's a case of just riding them out and taking the wins when they come and really enjoying that process of harvesting the honey when it comes in.
Great. So you're getting quite a few questions coming in on about, and I think it's like what you say, ask one bee and you get a different answer.
Yes.
About the queen excluder.
Yep.
Just wondering what's best, or are you going to just give another answer?
I will give another answer, particularly with this question, because I don't live in an area where I have to remove the queen excluder, but it is advice we do give, which is to remove the queen excluder prior to a long cold winter. Reason being is the queen can get left behind should the bees move up into boxes above, and the queen can to perish from the cold. So if you're running depends, if you've only got a short winter and your colony's quite big, you might find that the ball's sort of central in the hive here, and the queen is able to stay below the excluder without getting too cold. If you've got multiple boxes, then I think definitely remove that queen excluder, because the bees are likely to move up through those boxes, consuming the honey to survive for the winter. And come the springtime, when the bees are getting ready to expand again, the queen starts laying, you'll need to shake all of those bees down to the bottom box, put your excluder back in place, and away you go again. Some people run with no excluder at all year round. What I've found is it's very queen specific. One queen won't lay in the flow frames while another queen will. And I've got a hive right outside my door. It's been now 4 years, no queen excluder, never had an issue with her laying in the frame. But equally, I've had issues where I've had a hive like that, and I happened to be there one day when they were dragging the queen out, and a month later the next queen was laying in the flow frames after years not laying in them. So it's very queen specific if you decide to ditch the queen excluder altogether. If you do decide that, then make sure you have a look and learn by inspecting the flow frames whether you have a flow frame laying queen or not.
Doug, that is nice and clear for you all.
Yeah, that's nice and clear. Like most things in beekeeping, you need to experiment, have a think about the advice you're getting and try and see what works for you. Generally, if you're wondering and you've got a long cold winter ahead, yes, remove the queen excluder, let the bees move freely around the hive, consuming the honey. That was a shorter answer.
Cedar, John's asking, how much ventilation do bees need in the honey super?
So, not much is the answer. What I've found is if you go drilling holes in the top and the bees have access to that, they'll block it up. My experience is bees prefer to have it sealed at the top and open at the bottom, and they then can more accurately control the temperature inside the hive by fanning or not fanning. So what they need in the hot times is an entrance that's open. So if you have an entrance reducer, remove that. Give them the ability to fan and create a cycle up through the hive and down and out again. Now you could also remove the tray altogether, and then they'll be it's quite easy for them to maintain a cool environment in there. But my experience is vents up the top, the bees don't particularly care for.
Right, Cedar, could you place one of these flow hives in a greenhouse?
Well, you could if they had a way out. The greenhouse is unlikely to be big enough to support a colony of this size, bearing in mind that a hive like this could pollinate 50 million flowers in a day. So they like to forage, a couple of miles, 3 kilometres, or up to 6 miles, 10 kilometres around the hive if they're hungry. Now, you're not going to get enough flowers to support a hive like this in a greenhouse, but if they have a way out, then that is fine. Or if it's only a temporary measure, if you're putting it in there temporarily for pollination, then that might work. But generally, you want them to be free-ranging bees in the world.
Great. Question from Burnt Systems in Maryland. Apparently they have to build a 6-foot high fence around their hive. How much room would they need between the fence and the hive?
Okay, interesting. If you've got, we don't have rules like that where we are. Perhaps it's for dogs, I'm not sure. But in terms of room around the hive, around the sides and around the back, you need enough room just to be able to work the hive, which is only really enough room like you see here. You could have a fence here and still work your hive. You'd want enough room here. But out the front, you need a nice pathway. It's not essential, but it's nice if they can fly out the front and up and away on about that angle. And so you position your fence ideally 1.5 metres, 2 metres in front of the hive to give enough room for the bees to fly out and up and away. Otherwise what you'll find is they'll double back and be going straight past your head as you're trying to harvest your honey.
And Cedar, what causes honey to crystallise?
So the specific ratios of sugars in your honey will determine whether they crystallise or not, and also the moisture content and temperature. So the ratios of fructose and glucose typically are what determines whether honey will eventually crystallise, or it's also called go candied. Now, all honey that has a low moisture content down below that 20% will crystallise eventually. Now, it's just a matter of time. So you'll find the honey that was 3,000 years old in the Egyptian tombs would be crystallised in those honey pots. This honey here is likely to stay uncrystallised for several months, and then you'll find it'll start going a bit cloudy, and eventually it'll get crystallised. It's a perfectly normal thing to happen. experiences of you give honey to somebody and they say, oh, we threw it out because it went bad, and you go, okay, what did it do? And they say, oh, it went, you know, all hard, and you go, oh, that's not actually bad. It's can be quite an enjoyable honey, and some beekeepers will purposefully make their honey crystallise by seeding it with a nice fine crystal from some other honey. You'll find that in New Zealand, where Trace is from, and many other cold places where, because of the temperature, honey's likely to crystallise anyway, so they go ahead and make that a part of the honey experience, and it seems to be the fine crystals are preferred as a texture than the big coarse ones. So they'll go ahead and add fine candy to their honey and then watch it take on that crystalline structure throughout the jar. Whereas the supermarkets will tend to pasteurise the honey and heat it to a certain temperature for a certain time, and that will mean that it won't go candied for a very long time. That is, you're destroying the vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients and medicinal properties of honey, and that's a sad thing. So I wouldn't recommend pasteurising your honey. Always better just to take it straight from the hive, and it's perfect how it is. And if it goes candied, then enjoy that. My kids call it crispy honey, and they'll always choose to eat the crispy honey over the liquid honey.
Nice. Uber Strike, I love these names, has asked if harvested the first flow frame of the Flow Hive 2 living in Florida. The cells all looked capped, honey capped, but the honey came out thin. They got a refractor and the honey is 20% water content. Wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So that's just over what would be ideal. You ideally want it below 20 or closer to 18%. Now, if you're over that 20 mark, what you'll find is that it will probably start to ferment after some time, but that will depend on how many colony forming units are actually in the honey to start with. So if you've got a high amount of yeast in there, and that'll be, whether you do or don't, that will affect whether fermentation occurs as well. So the best thing to do with that is to consume it or keep it in the fridge. That will prolong that process, or make honey mead out of it. Now, it can happen sometimes where you get moisture content that's a bit high, it's a bit liquid in the jar, and it's not the end of the world. You just need to consume it. But you can find that the frame can be completely capped and it will come out a little bit liquid, and that is just your bees getting a little bit lazy when they're dewatering the honey and getting that moisture content low. So it does happen, and it's more about what you do with the honey after that.
Nice. This is Donna's asking, and I think she's talking about the hive seeder, not you. Do you recommend a split banana for extra nutrition?
Okay. Well, I do like eating bananas.
That's what I thought.
So I've never heard of people giving bananas to bees for nutritional value. What bees ideally are using for nutrition is a varied diet of pollen. So bees, like other species including us, do need a varied diet, and for them pollen is their protein, nectar is their, or honey is their carbohydrate, and they need a balanced diet of different pollens. And they don't just eat the pollen, they turn it into bee bread. If they don't have a balanced diet, a nice varied amount of different ones, then they will actually get sick. If you're going to feed supplements to your bees, I would go for pollen substitutes. The banana trick, I've heard, is can get used for actually getting the bees to clean shop and kick out things like chalk brood. So some people, as a chalk brood remedy, will put a split banana in the hive. The bees go, oh, that smells, because it has a similar kind of alarm pheromone kind of smell to it, and they'll get in there and it basically makes them more hygienic. It's like if a dog comes and does something nasty on your carpet, you're going to clean that up, but you're probably also going to do a bit of a spring clean while you're at it and make sure everything's just nice again. So that's the effect that they say a banana in the hive has, and whether it works or not, I'll leave it up to you guys to debate.
Great, I'm getting some great answers, Cedar, on that question about the 18 months honey. We've had some people say 2 months, 4 months, 6 months.
Okay, that's great. Chime in and help answer the questions. It seems like it's very varied, and you'll have to expect it to be a bit varied as well. Try your hand at it and see how things go.
Jackie's asking, how lives in southeast Queensland, how many frames of honey do you need to leave in the super over winter?
In southeast Queensland, I would say none, because, well, it depends where you are. If you're closer to the coast, I would say none, because here where we are, we're in northeast New South Wales, and it's a very similar environment, and we'll be harvesting honey as it comes in over the winter time, like we are now. So, if you're inland a bit, then it really does change. My father's inland about an hour's drive, and he's actually still getting honey now, but that's unusual for this time of year, and typically he will now get a couple of months with no honey before the spring kicks in out there. So if you're inland a bit, then I would suggest leaving them, you probably only need to leave them, say, 3 frames of honey, because it's still a short time before the flowers will be coming back again.
Great, and another question from Jackie is also just wondering, when should you begin checking the hive after winter? They're saying they had their hive swarm in late August.
Oh, okay.
Same in southeast Queensland, same place, same person.
The hive swarmed in late August last year.
Last year, yeah.
So that's an early swarm. However, spring here, kind of in this more subtropical regions, does start in August as far as the bees are concerned. The flowers are flowering, everything's all go, and your hive must have built up really quickly and started to swarm there. So as you see the numbers increase, then if you open the window and you're seeing lots of bees like that inside your hive, then that's the time to take a split, increase the size of your apiary. If you don't want the colony, then somebody else will. If you've got queen cells on frames already, then they can go straight into the new split and away you go. If you for some reason you don't want to take splits, then you can also increase the size of your hive and go through swarm prevention techniques like knocking off queen cells, introducing new fresh frames into your brood nest also.
Right, Cedar, this is a good question. I think you'll like this one. It's from Simon. Recently changed from a petrol lawnmower to a battery mower, and the battery mower has a high pitch, which he thinks the bees don't like. The bees have been attacking him and the mower. I didn't have this problem with the old petrol mower. I now have to close the hive early in the morning before I mow the lawns.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, if you went back to a petrol, whether they wouldn't mind the petrol or not, because it could be the case that the genetics in your hive has changed, and perhaps they superseded the queen, and the new queen mated with some rascal drones down the road, and you've got some aggressive traits in your hive. Now, if I drive a mower past the entrance of my hive, 1 out of every 5 or 10 hives, you'll see getting agitated, and the rest are fine with it. So it's very specific to the colony.
Great, people noticing the sounds of the birds here, and also, of course, wondering whereabouts in Australia we are.
We're close to the most easterly point of Australia, and it's a beautiful area where we get honey like this in the wintertime. It's probably similar to probably the California zone in the USA, where you've got a more subtropical temperate climate with honey, a very long honey season, if not even honey in the wintertime.
Great, now we've got someone wondering if you can keep beehives in Alaska.
Alaska. Now, do we have... We'll have to look that up. We probably do have some hives in Alaska. I know we have them in places like Norway. We have them in Canada. We have them in Europe, and down south here in the most southerly area in Tasmania. So you can certainly keep bees in colder regions, and we'll have to get back to you on the numbers of flow hives in Alaska.
Great. Just wondering, starting to get into beekeeping and thinking, how do you tell what mood they are in if you need to move them?
Okay. Generally, there's two parts to that question. The moving, you would close the hive up in the night or very early morning before the bees go out, and then you would choose to move your hive in the cooler part of the day, i.e. early morning, and that way you don't risk your hive overheating in transport. If you're only talking moving them a little way, yes, you can move them in the daytime, and that might mean just picking up your hive and moving it a couple of meters and putting it down again. And you can move it slowly across your yard like that, just moving it a few meters a day, and the bees will be fine with that. If you're unsure about whether your bees are going to be a bit aggressive with that, then make sure you are in your bee suit with your gloves on. Get someone to help you with their bee suit and gloves on as well, and you pick up down low on the hive, right under here, and just move it back a few meters and put it down again. Usually hives are okay with that, but occasionally you'll get an aggressive hive, and it's really worth protecting yourself well.
Right, how do you treat a bee sting?
So bee stings, most people are okay with it. Local swelling is pretty normal, but you can have issues with anaphylaxis, as you do with peanuts and other things as well. So bear in mind, read out safety information, look up anaphylaxis, understand it, and make sure you have followed guidelines that probably tell you that you should have an EpiPen on hand. So EpiPens are good for anaphylaxis. Back to a normal bee sting, where you've simply got a bee put a stinger in your hand, for instance. The idea is, well, typically if the sting is ripped out of the bee, it doesn't always, but it often does, and the stinger stays in you and it has the poison gland still pumping away on it. So if you squeeze that poison gland, the rest of the venom in that poison gland will then be injected into you. So the idea is you scrape sideways. So if you've got your hive tool with you, you just scrape it sideways with that, or you could use your fingernail, and it's just a case of scraping sideways to remove it from your skin instead of squeezing that little poison gland that's still attached to it. Next, I usually would typically do nothing, but some people have swelling reactions that are uncomfortable and they like to take antihistamines. You'll need to consult medical advice.
Put honey on it?
Some people put honey on it. That's another idea. But yeah, chime in. We've got an answer of how to treat a normal bee sting.
Great. Oh, what was I just... Okay, Nate's just said, recently purchased a Flow Hive 2 and is a new beekeeper. Welcome, Nate. Noticed in the past few weeks that there are thousands of bees bedding on the entrance of the hive. There's no signs of swarm, and they have added the super. Just wondering, is this normal summer behaviour, or should I get another brood box?
If you're getting quite normal nights, then that is normal summer behaviour to have bees bearding on the outside. If you've got them bearding on the outside and you open the side windows and the hive is full like this, then it might be a case that you've got a very strong colony. There's lots of nectar around and they're really expanding. In that case, you could either take a split, which would be my preferred method, and then you've got 2 hives, or as you say, you could add more boxes, another brood box or another space.
Is it okay, Cedar, to give the bees water?
It is. Now, there's been some great tests. Fred Dunn has a video called Bees Need Minerals, where he's tested water with, you get this bottle, this towel of water, and you put a teaspoon of salt in it, and you test that over not having the salt in it, and the bees will always prefer the salty one. And that's why you'll find them sucking on mud, you'll find them going to salty swimming pools and so on, because they, like us, need minerals, and they'll collect that from wherever they can get hold of those minerals. So it's a good idea if you're in a really dry area and there's nowhere for them really to get water, to put out a water source for them, and you might like to add a little bit of salt to that as well.
Great. Cooper's asking, moving in Florida and getting you into beekeeping and wants to move house in the future. Just wondering how much space is needed in your backyard for a hive?
So beekeeping is a wonderful thing because you can get real amounts of produce from a very small footprint, especially with the flow hive where you don't need the rest of the extraction equipment and a room to do it in. So here we are with an area this big, this beautiful amount of honey coming in, and it's simply because these bees will go out foraging in a big radius 3 to 10 kilometres away to bring in that. Beekeepers will keep their hives on rooftops in the city, they'll keep it on balconies in the city, they will keep it in urban backyards, and it's more of a case of making sure where the bees are flying is comfortable for humans and pets around the hive. So this area out the front is typically an area that you're trying to avoid being where a pathway is. So today's a bit of a cold old day and there's not much going on at the entrance, but typically as things warm up today you'll find a lot of bees coming in to the entrance of the hive here, and that's where you want to avoid having to walk past that area. So situate your hive so that dogs and humans aren't walking right in front of the hive, or you'll find you'll get some stinging issues.
Cedar, we've had the Alaska, we've had the hot temperature, and now we've got someone about the desert. What about beekeeping in the desert?
Yeah, you do get some honeys in the desert, assuming there is vegetation there to create flowers. And you'll get some very thick honeys where the bees are easily getting that moisture content down below even 16% moisture. So very interesting honeys you can get in the desert areas as well. So I guess ask around, it's always good to get local beekeeping advice, but it can be a great place to keep bees as well.
Well,
we've got time for a
oh good, I tell you,
question.
They're all on fire here today, Cedar. A couple of answers on that. Bee sting was a bag of frozen peas, works well, and a dissolvable aspirin in a small amount of water with a bit and make it into a paste.
Okay, interesting ideas.
Yeah. Joanne's asking, if the new queen is aggressive and affects the colony, what is the solution?
Okay, the solution is to change the queen to known genetics. So go to a queen breeder and ask for a nice gentle colony, a gentle genetics, and the process would be then going through finding that queen. Can be a bit of a daunting process, so you might need to get someone to help you, because the idea is you're going to be pulling apart your whole hive, finding the queen somewhere down here in the brood nest, taking her away, waiting 24 hours and then introducing the new queen to your hive, which typically comes in a little cage with a block of candy at the end, and the bees will chew away at that candy and the new queen is released into the hive a bit later after the colony has gotten used to her new pheromone. And away you go, about a month later, the temperament of the whole hive. So that's generally what you do, and it's called requeening, and beekeepers will do it for aggression reasons, for production reasons, and just often as a process, just they'll go through and requeen all the hives every couple of years to keep up that production of young, so they have a big booming colony ready to forage hard and collect a lot of honey. For us, we can let queens get a lot older because we're not necessarily after that extra 10, 20, 30% production that a commercial apiarist is.
Okay, last question, Cedar, because this is a good one, because I love this, because it's all about the design of the flow frames. Just wondering, when you harvest the honey, what stops the bees from getting stuck in the cells? Okay,
good question. Now, we put a lot of attention to that, my father and I, and sometimes you can see that happening even in the rear window, where you could get a bee stuck in its own wax. Now, what we did is we put gaps in the cells. If you've got a cell this shape, you can imagine if it moved like this and the bee was in there and it stuck its head through that area or wing or something, and then it moved back, then that could definitely damage the bee. So what we did is we made the cells parts this shape, like this, so the bees have to build a wax bridge across these parts. And what that means is if they move, the honey flows, moves back, and there happens to be a bee down this cell. Hopefully there's not, because you're harvested when the honey's nice and ready, but sometimes there is. And you've got, then a bee can only really be stuck in a bit of wax between these parts. And at worst, the other bees will help free that bee from that area. So that is an important part of the design to make it safe for the bees to be down the cells while you're harvesting. Thank you very much for tuning in, and hopefully you've got some good things for us to cover next time. Put the comments in the below what you'd like us to cover, and same time next week we'll be tuning in. Don't forget to check out thebeekeeper.org if you want to fast track your learning from square one right through to a deep scientific and practical knowledge of beekeeping. It's also a great fundraiser, raising funds for the honeybees, for native bees, for habitat regeneration.